In 2008, No Country for Old Men was the big winner at the Oscars. At the time, the Coen brothers received both Best Film and Best Director awards. This extremely violent film tells the story of an army veteran who, during a hunting trip, stumbles upon the remnants of a drug deal gone wrong. Apart from numerous bodies, he finds a briefcase containing more than $2 million. He decides to take the money with him, and from that moment on, he's on the run. A gang of Mexican drug dealers wants him dead. A sheriff is tracking him down, and most importantly, a ruthless hitman is hot on his trail, a mysterious psychopath named Shigur, played by Javier Bardem, a character as terrifying as he's elusive. Let's take a closer look at three characters. Llewellyn, the army veteran who wants to build a new future with his wife using the drug money he's found. Our terrifying Shigur, who moves through the story like a murderous ghost. And Bell, the elderly sheriff who has to face the senseless violence that surrounds him. Despite the film's brutal and absolutely not optimistic atmosphere, each of these three characters does manage to capture the evangelical imagination. Llewellyn is a man with his heart in the right place, but who by chance becomes a character in a story in which he doesn't really belong. "You're not cut out for this," a mobster confides to him with a certain level of affection. "You're just a guy who happened to find those vehicles." A large part of the film thus chronicles Llewellyn's decline. At the beginning of the film, he's the hunter who has the power over life and death. When he decides to appropriate the briefcase filled with money, he himself in turn becomes the hunted game. His eventual demise even lacks all the typical Hollywood drama. We arrive just too late to witness the tragic moment. Llewellyn has been unceremoniously gunned down. It reminds me of a passage from the Gospel of Luke. To the two brothers arguing over the inheritance, Jesus says, "Take heed and beware of covetousness. For one's life does not consist in the abundance of the things he possesses." He then uses the image of a rich man hoarding his wealth, and to whom God says, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself?" If only Llewellyn had had the strength to let the money pass him by. Now he becomes an example of how you will end up if you let yourself be enchanted by material wealth. Incidentally, the gang of Mexicans who come after him will meet the same fate. A different destiny is in store for the ghostly mass murderer Shigur. Again, atypical for a Hollywood production, he manages to elude death at the end of the film. It almost appears as if he's intangible and immortal. Like a grim reaper, he moves through the story, leaving a path of destruction in his wake. One spicy detail is the room Shigur lives to chance. A game of heads and tails decides if a victim lives or dies. This gives the murders an extra impersonal character. It's reminiscent of the mythological image of the fates cutting the thread of life. The assassin is merely the executor of a sentence issued by higher power, one from which no one can escape. Actor Javier Bardem was rightly awarded an Oscar for his portrayal of this killing machine, precisely because he succeeds in giving Shigur a superhuman allure. The battle is unequal, and yet, even then, Victims look for a way out. You don't have to do this, they say when they come face to face with death. They have the naive idea that they can convince him not to strike. Of course, this has no effect whatsoever. The ritual with the coin forces the victims to surrender to the process, to accept their fate. Significantly, his last victim refuses to cooperate. Llewellyn's wife says to Chigurh, "The coin don't have no say, it's just you." The killer's answer sounds mysterious. "I got here the same way the coin did." Chigurh sees no distinction between his role and that of the coin. And what does all this have to do with religious life? The inevitability of death is an important thought in Christian proclamation. Read Psalm 103. "As for man, his days are like grass. As a flower of the field, so he flourishes. For the wind passes over it, and it's gone, and its place remembers it no more." In a society like ours, which seeks to compartmentalize and even control death, the biblical tradition reminds us of the harsh reality. Death transcends us. It's the ruthless villain who exits the stage unmolested at the end of the film. Even Jesus, whom Christians venerate as the Son of God, has experienced and suffered the immense power of death. Sheriff Bell struggles to accept this. For the duration of the film, he fights the supremacy of death. But he's constantly playing catch-up. The effort he makes to save Llewellyn, for example, is in vain. When he discovers his dead body, something breaks in the sheriff. Exhausted, he rides out into the desert to the reclusive home of his brother, an impoverished old man who has learned that Bell is resigning as sheriff. When asked why, Bell says, "I feel overmatched." He sees his profession, his commitment, his life as a battle against death, a battle he's losing. And exactly at that moment, God comes up as a topic of conversation. Bell says, "I always figured when I got older, God would sort of come into my life somehow. He didn't, and I don't blame him. If I was him, I would have the same opinion of me that he does." Where is God in all this? The good guy has the impression that he's left to fend for himself, that God doesn't consider him worthy to do his job. His brother, however, dismisses this. "You don't know what he thinks," he says. After a moment of intense silence, Bell's brother continues, "What you got ain't nothing new. This country is hard on people. You can't stop what's coming. Ain't all waiting on you. That's vanity." With this philosophical reprimand, the old brother puts Bell's story in a larger perspective. That's just the way it is. I find it interesting that you can put a telling colon in this quote. "You don't know what God thinks, colon, and so I will tell you what God thinks. What you are experiencing here is nothing new. The world doesn't revolve around you. That's vanity." You can read this as a prophetic statement. By the way, it's reminiscent of the way God answers Job in the biblical book of the same name. The impotent Job loses everything and calls God to account. God's masterful response boils down to this: "Who are you to question the grand perspective of creation?" Not the most sympathetic response from the biblical God, but to the point. After this intense moment, we don't see Bell again until the end of the film. He's sitting at home having breakfast with his wife. Apparently, he has effectively quit his job and doesn't quite know how to fill his days. When asked by his wife, he recounts what he dreamed that night. 2 dreams involving his deceased father. His account lasts for 1 minute and 20 seconds. Then the image fades to black and the film has ended. I don't know if I've ever seen such an impressive ending to a film. Very austere, no music. Besides Bell's voice, we only hear the ticking of a clock and the story of a dream. A night scene in a distant past. A mountain pass with snow. Bell's riding a horse when his father passes him by. He carries a light with him. And in the dream, I knew he was going on ahead. He's fixing to make a fire somewhere out there in all that dark and all that cold. And I knew whenever I get there, he'd be there. Then I woke up. I don't know if this is an intentional reference to Jesus' disciples and the lake, to the fire Jesus makes for the disciples who fished on the lake for a night. I do know that this bloodthirsty film ends with a vision of hope. Someone has gone up ahead and is waiting for us. Knowing that the Father is there and is preparing everything to receive us. That's what makes all that darkness and all that coldness of our reality livable, illuminating it. Then I woke up, Bell says. Would it be a coincidence that this is the literal translation of the biblical word resurrect?